My name is Piper Reynolds. I am 46 years old, and I used to be the wife of Daniel Grayson, a founding partner of one of New York's most powerful law firms. For more than 20 years, I quietly stood behind everything he achieved, from intimate client dinners to every paving stone in the home we called our refuge. I gave up my career, my independence, my youth, to build a life that looked perfect. Until that night. The firm's 25th anniversary gala was held at the Grand Elysium Hotel. Crystal lights, sparkling television cameras aimed squarely at the stage, shareholders and lawyers filling the room. Then Daniel raised his glass and smiled. "I want to announce a major change in my life." I thought he would thank me. He did not. He took his new assistant Emily's hand and announced to everyone, "Daniel and Piper are separated. And this is the woman I will marry." Scattered applause. Eyes turned toward me. Some people pulled out their phones to record. Some tried to hide their delight. But I did not cry. I did not lash out. I only smiled and lifted my glass. Because I knew the performance Daniel was putting on would collapse soon. Have you ever been betrayed in front of the whole world, at a time when you believed you were still indispensable? If you've ever been abandoned after all you sacrificed, leave a comment below. Hit like and subscribe to keep following my story. Because what happens next will turn everything upside down. I still remember the strained laughter from a corner of the ballroom when Daniel introduced his new assistant as if announcing a new company project. She stood beside him in a fitted white dress, the lights reflecting off flawless skin and blood-red lips. She tilted her head and smiled, sweet enough to draw attention, but not enough to hide a proud, challenging edge. I heard someone whisper behind me, "There's his wife. Piper. She's still here." A man stepped back to avoid the camera but wouldn't take his eyes off me. A woman gripped her husband's hand tighter while leaning forward to get a better look at Emily. Daniel stood there, smug, as if celebrating a hard-won victory. "Piper has been an important part of this journey, and I truly appreciate that," he continued, his tone like someone awarding a retirement medal. "But we've come to a different crossroads in life. I believe everyone deserves to be happy. And Emily, she makes me feel like a real man." I did not move. The wine glass in my hand was growing cold. A hush like a cold wind through an abandoned church passed across the room. The MC hurried to steady the event by asking the orchestra to play a gentle symphony. But the melody could not erase the shock that had just erupted. Daniel turned toward me, a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, but there was no apology, no moment of doubt, not even a glance of remorse. Just the look of a man who believed he had closed an old chapter without consequence. I set my glass gently on a nearby table. I watched the reactions around the room, shareholders clutching their wives' hands more tightly, longtime partners avoiding my gaze, a few young assistants trying to suppress smiles from across the room. "The future of the family," he said. I had thought I was that future. Minutes later, I stepped out of the ballroom as quietly as I had lived beside him for 22 years. No drama, no demands, no burden. But that night, as the heavy doors closed behind me, I was no longer the woman standing in Daniel Grayson's shadow. A limousine was waiting curbside. George, our longtime driver, hurried out to open the door. He looked awkward, as if unsure whether to ask or not. "Shall I take you home, Mrs. Grayson?" I nodded slightly. As the car started to move, I looked at him in the rear view and said calmly, "Call me Reynolds from now on, George." He looked at me for a second in the mirror, then nodded gently. "Happy to, Mrs. Reynolds." On the ride back, I checked my phone. Social media was flooded with images from the gala, comments splitting people into sides. A tabloid posted a headline, "Wife left in the middle of husband's engagement party. Cold, no tears." They knew nothing about me. They didn't know how many hours I had sat outside a courtroom waiting for Daniel to finish a session. They didn't know how many dinners were canceled, vacations postponed, birthdays forgotten. They didn't know how many nights I lay awake listening to him turn over on the couch. They had no idea how many fundraising events for his firm I quietly organized, how many speeches I drafted for him, how many errors I corrected behind the scenes. The penthouse was lit when I arrived. Of course, no one else was there. Daniel had moved out weeks earlier, claiming he needed space to focus on work. I took off my shoes, put my bag down, and walked straight into his study. The room still smelled of the woody cologne he used. The diplomas still lined the walls, And our wedding photo lay face down for how long, I couldn't tell. I opened the third drawer on the left. The documents were still there, a copy of the will drafted by his father, notarized, with a moral clause. If he divorces without proof of infidelity on the wife's part, all shares and family assets will be permanently transferred to a charitable organization run by the ex-wife. I had asked his father, Henry, why he would do that. When a man has everything, he tends to forget who helped him get there, he said. And I don't want my son to become that kind of man. I remember him looking at me for a long time after saying that. But what if he still does it? I asked. He smiled. Then there will be nothing left for him. Daniel had never bothered to read the will carefully. For him, the wealth was assumed. Power was a given. I sat in his leather chair, the light from the opposite building glinting through the windows. I breathed deeply, turned on my laptop, and composed the first email. To Judith Abernathy, a seasoned attorney who once told me, "Some women don't need to demand justice. Justice finds them when the time is right." I typed a short subject line. It's time. Then I rose, went into the bedroom, and pulled an old suitcase from under the bed. I was going to Vermont not to run away, but to prepare. Because Daniel thought he had cast me off. He had no idea that everything he thought he owned had never truly belonged to him. I dreamed of becoming an architect at 14, when I lived in a small wood house outside Asheville with my mother. She would sit on the porch reading while I drew without end bridges I imagined, roofs tiled in blue, parks with shining ginkgo trees. Back then I did not have many friends, but I had sketch paper, pencils, and dreams bigger than any town I'd lived in. I got into architecture school in Boston and later pursued graduate study in New York. I met Daniel at 24 at an urban design seminar I had attended mainly for the free lunch. He was a final-year law student. Young, sharp, speaking with the ease of someone used to being heard. When the presentation ended, I was about to slip away when Daniel approached, smiling and said, "You design buildings. I'll protect them from litigation." I laughed. His opener was nothing special, but there was something in his eyes that made me stop. We started dating. He often called me the calm in his chaotic world. I believed it. 2 years later we married in a small church near the Hudson River. I wore a square-neck dress I had designed, and he read his vows in his slanted handwriting. My mother had died 6 months before the wedding, and my father when I was 12, so at the ceremony there was only one person to walk me down the aisle. Henry, Daniel's father. He gripped my hand tight, and said softly, "From now on, you are my daughter." Not everyone is lucky to be loved like that by their in-laws. Every week Henry and I had lunch together, even when Daniel was so busy he couldn't spare a phone call. He listened to me, and sometimes encouraged me to return to architecture. But at the time I thought supporting Daniel from the wings was enough. I closed my small Brooklyn studio when Daniel launched his firm. When we moved into our Manhattan apartment, I told friends I was taking a break to care for the home. That break stretched into 22 years. I redecorated the apartment, took cooking and event management classes, even organized client receptions for Daniel's firm from garden parties to galas that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. People called me the graceful woman beside Lawyer Grayson, or Mrs. Grayson. She keeps everything perfect. No one ever asked what I wanted. Daniel would say I had taste, refinement, restraint, compliments that sounded lovely but were really like floor tiles, useful only if kept clean and in place. Once I suggested I reopen my design practice and take a few small projects. He was reading the paper and didn't look up, just said, "Fine, as long as it doesn't affect company events." I nodded. Out of habit. I don't resent his ambition. He was born into a family tradition of lawyers. Henry had been a federal judge before retiring. Success was almost assumed for Daniel, but amid the flow of achievements, I was left behind like a decorative stone on the riverbank valued only if it didn't obstruct the current. There is one memory I will never forget. For our 15th anniversary I prepared an intimate dinner at home with his favorite dishes and the kitchen filled with white orchids. Daniel came home late, pulled his phone out while I was pouring wine, and said, "Sorry, I forgot tonight." I smiled and said it was okay. But that night, while washing crystal glasses, I realized in his eyes I was the stable background for his life, not something he needed to protect. Henry, however, was different. Even in retirement he kept up with industry news each morning and would text me whenever Daniel had a long business trip. Is Daniel coming home for dinner? Are you tired? You should learn more about finance. There are things I want to leave to you. I thought at the time he said that out of fondness. Now I think he saw what I had lost long before I did. 3 years ago he called me up to his house in Vermont and said he wanted to show me an important document. I revised my will after his mother died, he said, referring to his wife. Daniel won't get a dime if he abandons you without legitimate cause. I froze. You don't trust your son? I don't want to judge him. But I've seen enough to know that men in this family, when they get too much, tend to forget initial promises. He handed me a copy of the will. If you ever need it, don't be afraid to use it. I put the document in my personal safe. At the time, I never thought I would have to open it. I believed love, even if it changed, wouldn't wither. I was wrong. And now, as Daniel stood beside another woman in front of hundreds of witnesses, I realized I was no longer meant to be anyone's backdrop. I was redesigning my own life plan, and some elements of that plan had been put into place long before. There are changes that require no explanation, because the silence within them is the clearest answer. About a year before that fateful gala, I began to feel the house strangely large, though the furniture remained, and Daniel still came home most evenings, sometimes late, but he came home. He stopped having dinner with me regularly, stopped touching my shoulder as he passed, stopped asking the usual, "How was your day?" Instead, he spoke about his new gym membership in Midtown, a place where people pay not only to run but to be seen running. He started wearing bespoke suits from an Italian tailor I'd never heard of. His wardrobe held fragrances I had never chosen, woody, spicy scents that felt distant and cool. I am not overly sensitive, but I live by observation. I noticed Daniel suddenly became unusually concerned with his image. He started to keep his distance from me whenever we appeared at company events. Before, he would always place his hand on my back when we entered a room, a gesture both intimate and polite. Not anymore. He walked ahead while I followed behind, like a logistics staff member. I continued doing my part, checking menus, arranging seating, sending thank you notes to every sponsor after an event. Daniel stood with Emily at the bar, laughing more than usual. I am not a jealous person. But Emily's eyes never left Daniel for more than 20 seconds. One Friday evening, I found a forgotten receipt on his desk. A dinner for two at Valentina's, the restaurant we used to go to for our 10th anniversary. I checked the date closely. It didn't match any client engagement I knew about. I examined other receipts in Daniel's wallet, then quietly opened the bank mail that came in. Recently, there had been a purchase at a high-end jewelry shop on Fifth Avenue. I didn't have a new necklace. There was no gift box on the nightstand. I didn't make a scene. I didn't confront him. I filed every detail away into a compartment in my head, folding them carefully like I used to fold his clothes before a business trip. That morning, he said he had to fly to Philadelphia for 2 days to meet a client. I stood in the kitchen pouring coffee as usual. "Are you driving or flying?" I asked. Daniel looked up from his phone. "Flying. Do you need anything?" "No." I smiled. "Just asking." He took a sip of coffee, grabbed his briefcase and left the house with light steps, like someone who'd just unfastened a knot. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the front door close. The weight in my chest had lifted. I felt strangely light. About 2 weeks later, I went to the garage for the gardening tools and heard a voice coming from Daniel's car. "I will too." No, she doesn't suspect anything. Don't worry." I froze, my back against the garage door, feeling as if something were squeezing each small vein in my chest. "I told you, after the company anniversary we'll handle everything. I don't want a big scene, okay? She's not the kind of woman who causes trouble." A pause. Then Daniel laughed, a low, almost sweet laugh. "Yeah. Me too." I turned and left the garage, as if I had never entered. I did not cry. I did not throw anything. I went straight to his study, opened my laptop, and pulled up the email. Henry had sent me the link to the backup copy of the will he kept on his personal cloud. I read each clause slowly, like studying the blueprints of an old building. Some lines were nearly invisible, but if you knew how to look, you could see how everything connected. The next morning I went to the bakery on the corner where Henry and I usually had breakfast on Thursdays. I ordered 2 servings of buttered toast as usual. He arrived on time, wearing his brown leather jacket and a dark silk scarf, his face calm as on all the mornings I'd sat beside him. "You look tired, Piper," he said. I nodded and poured him more tea. "Daniel hasn't called you much lately." "He's busy," I replied softly. Henry set his cup down and turned slightly. "Being busy is one thing, forgetting what matters is another." I studied him for a long moment. "That will. Did you really think it would ever need to be used?" "I hoped not," he answered. "But I've seen too many men let the best things slip away because they assumed those things would always be there." He took my hand and patted it gently. "You don't have to wait for someone to save you. You just need to stand up at the right time." I nodded. Perhaps that right time was closer than I had thought. Dr. Silverman was a woman in her 50s, small in stature, with a low voice as soft as a breeze. She didn't use flowery language, and that made me trust her more than any comforting words. In the cool white room on the 6th floor of Westlake Medical Center, she looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "We found a nodule on the left lobe of your thyroid, a little over 1 inch in size. Initial tests suggest it may be malignant, but fortunately it's still at a very early stage." I didn't ask why or how long. I sat there, gripping the strap of my purse on my lap, my back straight as if the smallest slippage would make everything collapse. "We need a biopsy to confirm. Then we can perform surgery to remove the affected thyroid lobe. The chances of recovery are very good." I nodded, mechanically. "Would you like someone to come with you to the next appointment?" she asked. "Your husband, perhaps?" "No," I answered quickly, surprising even myself. Leaving the exam room, I did not cry. I went straight to the parking garage, got into my car, and sat in silence for nearly 20 minutes. On the dashboard, the digital clock blinked, 6:47 p.m. I pulled out my phone. Daniel had texted, "Don't wait. Dinner with clients. We'll be home late." I stared at that message for a long time. Nothing unusual. It was like hundreds of messages I'd received before. But in that moment, I realized I was no longer a part of his life, at least not in the way I had believed. I drove home, stopped at the organic market near the square, and bought a bunch of lavender, not for the living room but for the bedroom where I was beginning to miss myself. Daniel did not come home that night. I sat alone in the kitchen, the warm light soft over the wooden table. In front of me was a plate of salad I couldn't eat, and an open travel magazine, its pages fluttering from the breeze through the small window above the sink. I touched the spot on my neck where the vague ache from the exam lingered. There was a truth I had never imagined keeping to myself, and the person I had trusted most was becoming a stranger. The next day Daniel came home at about 10 a.m. Dressed and smelling faintly of mint and alcohol. He didn't look at me as he walked in. Just set his keys down and took off his watch, a familiar routine like a well-worn musical phrase. "Do you have time for lunch today?" I asked, my voice even. Daniel buttoned his shirt and glanced at me. "Not sure. Meeting with the investment team at 1 p.m. What about tonight?" "Probably not. You know, after the anniversary things will be busier." I nodded. "Could you give me an hour on Saturday?" He hesitated. "Is something wrong?" "Yes," I said. "I'll talk at dinner. Just an hour." He sighed lightly, as if I'd asked for something extravagant. "Okay. But don't make it tense. All right?" I smiled. "No. Just a conversation." I spent all of Friday afternoon preparing the meal. I cooked his favorites: pepper-crusted roasted beef, mashed potatoes with garlic and butter, and a custard dessert I'd learned from his mother. I polished the crystal, lit 2 taper candles at the center of the table, and played soft jazz on the old record Daniel had given me in our first year of marriage. I put on a cream silk dress and light makeup to hide the shadows under my eyes. I didn't want to look fragile. Daniel arrived on time. He glanced over the table and raised his brow. "Is there a special occasion?" I shook my head. "I just wanted a proper dinner." We ate most of the meal without mentioning the real reason for the meeting. Just as I was about to speak, Daniel set down his knife and fork, wiped his mouth, and sat upright. "I need to say something first," he began, avoiding my eyes. "I've seen a lawyer. We should proceed with a divorce amicably." I did not respond. My hand touched the wine glass and turned it slowly. "I don't want to drag things out. I don't want to hurt anyone," he went on as if reading a prepared script. "We've grown apart. You deserve your own life. And so do I." I have not betrayed you, I said softly. He flinched. I didn't say that. Just to be clear. I haven't been unfaithful. I haven't cheated. I haven't left. Daniel was awkward. I just think, we're not the same as before. I don't want to live a lie. I nodded. Are you seeing someone? He was silent a moment, then muttered, Emily. I was not surprised. I put my fork down, took a napkin from my lap and set it on the table. Daniel pulled a folder from his pocket and placed it on the table. I've prepared everything. The lawyer will send you the papers. No court. Assets split evenly. I won't touch what your mother left you. The Vermont house is negotiable. I didn't touch the folder. I will sign. Daniel looked up as if he did not believe what he was hearing. You don't need to explain or apologize more, I said. Just send what's necessary. I'll sign. He nodded, relieved. I stood up and cleared the dishes. He moved to stand as well, but I waved him off. Sit. I'll wash up and make it clean before letting go. He chuckled softly. Embarrassed or awkward, I couldn't tell. I stood at the sink, the water running in a steady stream, feeling empty. I hadn't told him about the nodule. I hadn't said that I needed surgery. I did not plan to say it. Not because I didn't want him to know, but because I wanted to keep him from having any right to enter my story again. I dried my hands and stared at my reflection in the window glass. That night I didn't sleep much. I lay staring at the ceiling, counting the slivers of light from street lamps through the curtains. A new blueprint was forming in my head, not for domes, staircases, or plumbing. For a new life, quiet, independent, and without someone next to me to pull me down. I went to Vermont on a Saturday morning when the dew still clung to the fields, and the sun was just warm enough to blur the chill on the car windows. The road to Henry's farmhouse wound through white gravel, flanked by tall pines that stood like sentries guarding something old and steadfast. He had called me 3 days earlier with a short message. Piper, can you come up to the house? I have something important I want you to see. I didn't ask for details. I remembered his voice low, deliberate, with no room for delay. The wooden house sat on the edge of the hill, overlooking a small pond surrounded by a stand of red maples. I had been here many times, but that day everything felt different. The front door was unlocked. I knocked lightly and went inside. Henry was sitting in the study, slightly hunched, holding an unlit pipe. On the table were 2 steaming cups of tea and an old wooden box. You're here, he said without turning around. I crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite him. How are you? How are you is a relative term, he replied, a small smile lifting one corner of his mouth. Old people don't need to be well, only clear-headed enough to do what must be done. He pushed a teacup toward me. Drink. The kind you like. I took the cup in silence, my hand slightly cold against the warm ceramic. The room fell quiet for a moment. Only the sound of wind outside the window and the creak of the wooden floor as the old cat stretched in a patch of sun. I heard about the divorce, he began, still looking out across the pond. I set my cup down. I hadn't planned to tell you. You don't need to, he said. I've lived more than half a life to notice when a man's view of his wife changes. A lump rose in my throat. I'm all right. He turned to look at me. I believe you. But because you are all right, I asked you to come. He drew the wooden box toward him, lifted the lid, and took out a bundle of old documents tied with blue ribbon. He untied it and withdrew a neatly printed packet stamped with the notary seal of Jameson, the Grayson family's longtime legal advisor. This is my most recent will, he said. I revised it after Daniel's mother died, 6 years ago. I glanced at the first page. His name printed in all caps was centered at the top, under it the words will and testament. You're part of it, he continued, his voice even. And Daniel, of course, is the primary heir, with conditions. I looked up. Conditions? He must maintain the marriage for at least 25 years, or if there is a divorce it must be initiated by the wife, or there must be proof of adultery on her part. Otherwise, the entire estate will be transferred to an independent charitable trust, which you will administer. I sat stunned. I didn't tell Daniel, he said, as if reading my thought. He never read the will closely. He assumes inheritance is automatic. I leaned back in my chair. Why did you do that? He refilled my cup slowly, taking his time with each movement, as if weighing every word. Because I watched him gradually forget who walked beside him along this road. I saw you sitting in the wings at shareholder meetings while he accepted the praise. I saw you organize parties, raise funds, set tables, smile at people who never asked your name. He lifted his head and looked straight into my eyes. And I saw the look on your face when he stopped turning back to find you. I could not speak. Inside my chest, it felt as though a wall had collapsed, opening a space so vast it made breathing difficult. You were the one who knew how to listen. Not just to Daniel but to me as well, he said quietly. You are not merely a wife. You are the keeper of what remains humane in this family. I reached out and touched the edge of the document. I don't want to ruin Daniel. You won't ruin anyone, he shook his head. You only need to stand in the right place when things come down. The rest? Life will sort out. I left the estate as the sun dipped low. In my hand was a notarized copy of the will. In my coat pocket I still had the invitation Daniel had given me to the firm's 25th anniversary celebration. I drove along Vermont's winding roads, the cold air slipping through the car seams. Inside me, there was no longer pain. There was a quiet preparation. I would not do battle with Daniel. I would not expose him with tears. I would not cry in the hall or hurl a glass at anyone. I only needed the right moment. And the right place. I cut my hair after the third treatment. Not because I feared hair loss or wanted a new image. Because when I looked in the mirror that morning I saw a woman clinging to long strands as if they were the last remnants of an old life. I sat in a small salon on Bleecker Street where I had my hair done the night before our wedding. I want it short, I told the stylist. Straight, chin length. No curling, no coloring, nothing to hold on to. She looked at me for a moment, then nodded and began. The hair fell onto the cape piece by piece like dusting off layers of time. When I stepped out into a light rain, I didn't take an umbrella. The new cut clung cool and light to my scalp. I walked home with muddy shoes, but my mind was unusually still. I signed up for a morning yoga class on Tuesdays and Thursdays at the community center near Riverside Park. In the first session I couldn't get through half the routine. My body resisted, joints popping, breath ragged. The instructor, a woman around 60 named Lynn, came over when I was struggling out of cat pose. No one asks you to be as supple as a willow, she smiled. Just stand firm like an oak. I don't know why that made me want to cry. Maybe because for years I had forgotten how to stand firm. I began relearning financial management, an 8-week course run by a nonprofit that helps women restart life after divorce or loss. There I learned to read a balance sheet, to understand how an investment fund operates, and even to analyze risk when the market shifts. No one in the class knew I used to be Daniel Grayson's wife. I didn't tell them. I didn't need admiration or pity. They simply saw a middle-aged woman taking notes. Always sitting in the second row by the window, never late. I legally reclaimed my maiden name on a Friday, right after my final consultation with Dr. Silverman. You'll need follow-up, but the surgery went well. No signs of spread, she said, peering over black-rimmed glasses. I don't have to tell you how strong you are, because clearly you don't need anyone to tell you. I smiled, thanked her, and walked straight to City Hall. The name change form wasn't long, but when I wrote in the box for the name I wished to use, my hand paused. I wrote, Piper Reynolds. The clerk was a woman of Irish descent, about 60, her gray hair in a tight bun. She looked over the paperwork, then up at me, tilting her head. Divorce? She asked. I nodded. Your daughter? She guessed. No. Myself. She stopped, then stamped the form with a solid thud. Welcome back. That simple sentence felt like being handed the keys to my life. That evening I called Judith Abernathy. We had been classmates in a foundational law course I took as an elective during architecture school. Judith was the first woman I had seen step into a room full of men in suits and speak without lowering her voice. Judith. It's me. Piper Reynolds. Piper? Her voice sounded surprised but not distant. Piper Grayson? The old name, I said. I need to see you. There are things only you can help with. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., my office is on the 12th floor of the Lexington Tower. Bring everything related to the will and ownership documents. And bring a reason so I don't rip your ex-husband to pieces. I laughed. I'll bring motivation as well as reason. Judith's office overlooked the Hudson, bookshelves pristine, the kind of silence where you could hear the second hand on a clock. She was as before salt and pepper hair, wireframe glasses, a charcoal suit and a voice that struck like a gavel. I told the whole story. Henry's will, the moral clause, the divorce, Daniel's silence, and my plan to show up at the upcoming engagement party. Judith didn't interrupt. She took notes with a blue fountain pen, neat lines. When I paused, she laid down the pen and propped her elbows on the desk. Legally, the card you hold is an ace, she said. But to make it publicly binding, we need to re-notarize the will and collect 2 independent witness attestations, affirming Henry's competency when he signed. Fortunately, I handled the legal work for him on a trust transfer once. I breathed out, relieved. Are you sure you want to go all the way? Judith asked, her gaze sharp as a needle. I'm not doing this to win, I said slowly. I'm doing it to remind them I never disappeared. Judith nodded. Then let me do my part. And you pick a dress that will keep people from looking away. I left the Lexington building that afternoon. The river breeze cold against my face, and red leaves drifting along the walk. I felt no thirst for revenge. No bitterness. Just a woman stepping toward her own light after years in someone else's shadow. I received the invitation on an October morning, an ivory envelope in my mailbox at my new Upper West Side apartment. The gold-embossed lettering was formal and heavy in the way Daniel always carried himself. Daniel Grayson and Emily Carter's engagement at Grayson Estate, Vermont. I opened it without trembling, though a wave rose in my chest. Not surprise, audacity. That estate had been the place where Henry and I sat for hours on the porch listening to the wind across the meadows. The place where Daniel and I painted a white fence together and planted a small maple on our 5th anniversary. Now he turned it into a stage for some new act, in front of the press and financial partners. The invitation was not sent by Daniel. Tucked at the bottom in a small handwritten note were the words, "I think you should be there. M." It was Marcus Hall's handwriting, one of the firm's major shareholders. He had told me privately at receptions, "Piper, without you, Daniel would not have half of what he has." I held the note all morning, then set it beside the copy of Henry's will. The pieces had slotted into place. The next day I called Judith. "I'm going," I said. "You sure?" she asked, voice steady but her eyes on the phone felt like a laser. "I need to be there," I said. "Not to shame them, but to remind them there are things you cannot discard." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll come too. Not inside the event but nearby. The paperwork is ready." On the morning of the engagement celebration, I wore the deep green dress Judith had helped me choose, smooth silk, a tasteful V-neck, a fitted waist, simple but radiating confidence. I tucked my short hair slightly to one side, letting the strands of silver show. I did not hide them, nor did I flaunt them. A car took me from the small hotel in Woodstock to the estate. Along the way I watched the maples blazing red, leaves carpeting the lane up to the big house. Vermont's autumn air is usually quiet, but that day the sound of hundreds of guests, jazz music, and luxury cars pulling in back-to-back cracked the usual stillness. Reporters crowded the gate. The sign reading Grayson Estate shone. I stepped out of the car. A few flashes flickered, then multiplied as they realized who I was. I heard a whisper. "There's the former Mrs. Grayson. No, Reynolds. What is she doing here?" I walked slowly, unhurried, letting each step feel like a quiet assertion. In the garden behind the estate, everything was spectacular to the point of artifice. White tents stood on the lawn, long tables draped with lace, crystal glasses lined up like a glittering army. Arrangements of white roses and red maples were everywhere, pale golden lights pouring down, as if an outdoor Broadway production had been staged. At the center of that stage stood Daniel with Emily. He wore a tailored black suit, a red silk tie, and held a glass of champagne. Emily wore an off-the-shoulder white gown, her smile bright as if she were playing a fairy-tale princess. As I entered, the chatter dimmed. A few women covered their mouths and whispered. Some men adjusted their ties and looked away. Emily saw me first. Her smile froze for a heartbeat, then quickly snapped back into a look of scornful confidence. She leaned close to Daniel and whispered. Daniel turned. Under the warm lights I saw his face register a flicker of surprise, then he masked it with a half-smile. "Piper," he said loud enough for many to hear. "I didn't expect you. But, welcome." I smiled, resting my hand on the glass I'd taken from a passing server. Hello, Daniel. Hello, Emily. Quite an event, impressive. Emily squeezed Daniel's hand, her smile taut. We're so glad you could attend. What a surprise. No one said more. The silence around us felt thick enough to cut. I looked at the scene, faces I recognized from New York's legal circles, people who had sat at my table and drunk the wines I chose, now watching as if the evening were a dramatic play. A young reporter raised a camera, then lowered it. I heard camera shutters here and there, the scratch of notes. Have you prepared your speech? I asked Daniel softly. He frowned slightly. Of course. Good. Because afterward, I might have a few words as well. Emily gave a strained laugh, out of tune. This is our party, Piper. Not yours. I lifted my glass so the light caught the deep red of the wine. Every stage has its surprises, Emily. It's often the surprises people remember. I saw Daniel flinch, not from the words so much as from the realization that my gaze was no longer that of the woman who stood behind him. The jazz started up again, but the atmosphere had shifted. I stood there among the crowd, calm as if I were the host rather than an uninvited guest. In my handbag the notarized will waited quietly, ready for the moment I chose to lay it on the table, the final card in a game Daniel thought he had won. The orchestra's volume dropped, as if even they sensed something about to break in the illuminated garden. I stepped a few paces toward the center where Daniel and Emily stood. Hundreds of eyes fell on me, surprise and curiosity filling the space. Sorry to interrupt, I said, loud enough to cut through the breeze and the click of shutters. I don't plan to stay long. But there's something I think Daniel should hear. And probably all of you should witness. Daniel tightened his face, trying to force a gracious smile. Piper, this is not the time. Exactly, I interrupted. This is not the time for you to perform another act. I opened my handbag and took out a thick manila envelope, light brown, bearing a clear notary stamp. I held it up so everyone could see. This is the notarized will of Henry Grayson, Daniel's father. An official copy kept by the family's lawyer. It contains a clause that, perhaps, Daniel never bothered to read carefully. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Emily gripped Daniel's hand tightly, her eyes darting. Daniel stood frozen, his face pale. I opened the envelope and took out the packet, reading deliberately. If the heir, namely Daniel Grayson, unilaterally terminates the marriage without proof of infidelity by his wife, or if he fails to maintain the marriage for 25 years, then the entire estate, including company shares, real property, and trust funds shall be transferred to an independent charitable organization administered by the wife. The air seemed to solidify. I heard the crash of a glass breaking from a distant table. Emily snatched the papers from my hand, her voice high with panic. This can't be real. This has to be a forgery. Daniel, say something. Daniel grabbed the packet, his eyes skimming the lines. His lips moved but no sound came. I could see his hand trembling, the champagne glass in his other hand wavered. No. My father wouldn't, he tried to say, his voice hoarse. I stepped closer and looked straight at him. Your father signed this clause 6 years ago, right after Evelyn passed. He knew your nature, Daniel. He anticipated that one day you might trade marriage for ambition and desire. That is why he put this mechanism in place, not to protect me, but to protect the values you have discarded. One of the major shareholders, Marcus Hall, came forward, his voice steady and firm. Daniel, is this true? If it is, then your shares in the company may be void. Daniel's face tightened. He looked around at partners, lawyers and reporters taking notes and filming each gesture and word. This is a misunderstanding. He tried to laugh, but the sound was hollow in the heavy silence. There must be a loophole. A clause like that. It is all legal, I cut in calmly. And tomorrow, Henry's attorney will send an official notice to the board, the press, and the regulators. Emily screamed, eyes blazing. You promised. You said everything would be ours. This house. The firm. The future. Her shout shattered through the garden, flashbulbs strobing. Emily lunged to tear the papers from my hand, but Marcus stepped between them. Calm down, Miss Carter, he said, voice cold. This is a public event, not a private room. Emily broke into sobs, her voice breaking. You deceived me. You promised I would have everything. Daniel turned to her, panic-stricken. Trust me. I'll figure this out. Just give me time. Before he could finish, a reporter pushed forward with a microphone pointed at him, asking, "Mr. Grayson, is it true that you stand to lose your inheritance because of a divorce from your ex-wife? Do you have a statement for shareholders and the firm's clients?" The question landed like a hammer. Daniel opened his mouth and could not find words. His partner's men who had toasted with me at countless galas whispered among themselves, calculating. I knew they were thinking about contracts, investments, potential losses. I folded the will back into the envelope and tucked it away. "I didn't come here to fight," I said. "I came to set the record straight. And the truth is, everything you've been flaunting tonight was never truly yours." Emily shoved Daniel and shouted bitterly, "You ruined my life." Some guests left the area, while others clustered in small groups, whispering. The music had stopped completely. The lavish scene had become a public tribunal, with Daniel sitting in the defendant's chair without a defense. I turned and walked slowly toward the gate as flashes continued behind me. In my ears were Emily's screams, Daniel's attempts at explanation, reporters calling my name. Yet those sounds receded, leaving a quiet calm inside. I did not tremble. Nor did I take pleasure. I simply felt one clear truth. The wall of lies he had built had collapsed right where he had believed himself the victor. News spread faster than any wind I had known in Vermont. One day after the engagement party imploded, the press was filled with headlines about Daniel. Financial papers talked about a succession crisis and a collapse of confidence. Entertainment magazines ran mocking headlines. "Top lawyer shoots his own foot, man loses everything for not reading the will." Emily's image yelling at Daniel in front of cameras became fodder for social media ridicule. Grayson and Hall's stock plunged over 2 days as investors panicked. Marcus Hall told me the board had called an emergency meeting. No one said it outright, but everyone understood Daniel couldn't remain in an executive role. 3 days later Marcus called. His voice was low but direct. "Piper, the board has asked Daniel to step down. If he doesn't, we'll vote him out. He has no choice." I was silent. "Don't assume you should feel glee," Marcus continued. "This is the natural outcome when someone trades trust for vanity. As for you, Piper, people now see you differently. You're not just Daniel's ex. You're proof that some women don't disappear when betrayed." I thanked him in a steady voice. After I hung up, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the park outside. Yellow leaves fell in patches. Children laughed at the playground. In the midst of turmoil, the world kept turning. As for Emily, I heard she moved out of the Manhattan apartment Daniel had rented within a week. Entertainment outlets even ran photos of her clutching a bag and wiping her eyes as she avoided cameras. She didn't stop there. She hired a lawyer and filed a claim demanding the sum Daniel had promised her for leaving her job, a figure approaching nearly $1 million. I didn't care whether she won. To me she was merely a fragment in the portrait Daniel had broken himself. She left like a fleeting shadow without meaning. What surprised me were the letters and calls that came afterward. Nonprofits, women's associations, and even a university in Boston reached out, inviting me to speak or collaborate. An email from the Young Women's Support Fund read, "We believe your story will inspire thousands who need to see inner strength can change destiny." A veteran journalist, Helen Brooks, called me directly. Her voice was moved. "Piper, you've become an accidental symbol. You didn't only strip power from a man. You made society reconsider how it treats women who have sacrificed their lives for family. We want to write about you, but not sensationally as a portrait." I replied, "I don't want to be seen as a victor. I didn't fight to win. I stood up to reclaim what should never have been taken." There was a pause, then Helen said, "That's exactly why your story deserves to be told." One afternoon I attended an event by a small Brooklyn foundation supporting women abandoned after divorce. I took the stage before about 50 people, no flashbulbs, no TV microphones, just a warm room, wooden chairs, faces that needed encouragement. I shared my journey, leaving architecture to stand behind Daniel, the diagnosis, signing the divorce papers, and finally holding the will. I spoke little, but I saw empathy and slow nods. A middle-aged woman stood and, voice shaking, said, "My husband left 2 years ago with everything. I thought I was just a shadow. Listening to you, I feel I can start again." Perhaps we are not as weak as we thought. I stepped down and hugged her tightly. In that embrace, I realized my story was more than a divorce or a legal clause. It was a reminder that no one needs to vanish in their pain. The next day there was a handwritten letter at my apartment. The handwriting was familiar. It was from Henry. Piper, I have watched from afar. You did the right thing. Not for revenge, but to uphold what we both believed. Loyalty must have value. I am more proud of you than anything I was proud of Daniel for. When I am gone, I trust you will know what matters to preserve. I read the letter again and again, feeling a calm spread through my chest. One Sunday morning I walked along the Hudson, my short hair tossed by the wind. A group of young women recognized me and ran over for a photo. One of them said, "Piper, you showed me no one can strip away your worth. I'm getting ready to leave a suffocating marriage. I'm scared, but thinking of you makes me feel less alone." I took her hand and looked into her eyes. You were never alone. Just remember that. After they left, I stood at the river's edge, watching the sunlight shimmer on the water. I no longer saw the woman who used to stand behind Daniel at glamorous events. I saw myself clearly, steady, composed, and as calm as the water before me. There was no anger left in me. Only gratitude that I still had the strength to move forward, and a belief that, no matter how loud the world became, I had recovered my own voice. I signed the charter for the charitable foundation in a small meeting room, light streaming through the tall windows. Outside, New York was still loud with traffic and hurried footsteps, but inside me there was a rare stillness. I named the foundation exactly as Henry wished, the Henry Foundation. The foundation was created with two goals: to support women fighting cancer, and to stand by those betrayed in marriage. I thought of the long nights I had spent in the kitchen, juggling test results while secretly reading Daniel's restaurant receipts. I knew there were thousands of women out there suffering both kinds of pain at once, physical and emotional. At the foundation's launch, a young woman stood up. Her face was thin from chemotherapy. She took the microphone, her voice trembling. I thought I had only two choices: to collapse or to endure alone. But learning about this foundation, I realized there is another path. To be shared with, to be heard. I went over and hugged her. That hug did not erase the illness or the wounds, but it made the whole room feel the power of connection. Meanwhile, the news about Daniel quieted, though it did not disappear. I read a small line in a business paper. Former managing partner of Grayson and Hall begins work at a local law firm in Providence. Gone were the images of lavish meetings and reporters waiting outside. I heard he had rented a small apartment, drove himself to work, and sometimes sat alone at a neighborhood bar after hours. I neither rejoiced nor mourned. It was simply the natural end for someone who built a castle on sand. One May morning, when spring was just giving way to summer, I moved out of Manhattan. The truck carrying my belongings left the city and headed north. I was bound for a small house on the Maine coast that I had bought after the foundation became official. The house was white with a steep roof and wide windows facing the ocean. On the porch, I planned to plant a row of lavender myself. The neighbors were mostly fishermen and small families who greeted me with warm smiles. Nobody cared that I had once been Daniel Grayson's wife. On the first day, I opened the windows and the sea breeze rushed in with the scent of salt and the sound of waves. I walked barefoot on the wooden floor, looking at the empty rooms. No expensive wine cabinet, no abstract paintings to show off, no rows of crystal flutes. Just me, four walls, and the blue sea outside. That afternoon, I carried a wooden chair down to the sand. The children next door ran and laughed into the wind. A Labrador streaked past, leaving wet paw prints. I sat down, breathed deeply of the salty air, and felt as if my lungs had been cleansed. The next day, I began drafting the first plans for the Henry Foundation at a desk by the window. I wanted the foundation to be more than a funding source. I wanted it to be a network for counseling, life skills classes, even creative retreats to help women regain confidence. I called Judith to ask her to be legal counsel. I reached out to Lynn, the yoga instructor, to organize free classes for cancer patients. Gradually, things took shape. It was no longer just a project on paper, but a new journey, one where I was building this time not for someone else, but for myself and for women like me. One morning, while sweeping the porch, a package arrived. Inside was a small box wrapped in craft paper with no return name. I opened it and found a pair of pearl earrings. A note inside read, "What belongs to you will, in the end, return to you, H." I smiled. Henry, or someone sending them on his behalf after he was gone. I put the earrings on and looked in the mirror. My short hair was neat, and my eyes seemed brighter. Not the woman who stood silent behind Daniel at glamorous parties, but someone else free and whole. In the late afternoons I often walked along the beach. The waves came and went in steady rhythm, like the earth's deep heartbeat. I thought about the path I had walked. Quiet sacrifices, the crushing illness, the raw betrayal, the media storm. All of it had come together, yet none of it broke me. Instead, they were like strong winds that pushed a boat out to sea, forcing me to grip the helm and find a new harbor. One sunset I stood on the sand, watching the sun drown red into the horizon as the sea breeze tossed my short hair. I smiled softly. Not a triumphant smile, but the serene smile of someone who had finally come home to herself. I had escaped betrayal. I had stepped out of the dark. Most importantly, I had found the voice I had neglected for so many years. Standing by the sea that evening, I realized life, no matter how violent the storms, still offers a chance to start again. I had once been the wife behind an ambitious man, betrayed and felled by illness. But I rose, walked out of the shadows, and found my own light. My story ends here, though I believe each listener has a journey of their own. Maybe you have given too much without being appreciated. Maybe you carry wounds no one sees. I want to ask you, if you were in my place, would you choose to remain silent and endure, or would you stand up once and write your life anew? Leave your thoughts below. I would love to hear them. And if this story made you reflect, follow the channel to join me on other journeys, stories about family, love, and the inner strength that helps us stand through life's storms.